Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to do an if you like this, try that. Specifically, if you like one of these popular Goodreads nominees, you might like this as well. And the Goodreads nominees are all going to fall under the fantasy umbrella. A few things to note. First off, I will have all the books I talk about in the description bar down below. Sorry if you heard my dog grunting very loud just now. I'll have all the books in the description bar down below. I'll also have any reviews I've done for any of the ones mentioned. And then additionally, if you have any of your own recommendations, feel free to leave them so that anybody who comes to this video doesn't just have my suggestions, but yours as well. Also, this is not going to be for every single one of the Goodreads nominees because first off, I haven't read them all, and second, I am actually filming this before the nominees are announced. I'm just that confident that all the ones we're going to be talking about today are going to be nominated, and also if I'm incorrect I can just fix that in editing, but I'm pretty sure that these are gonna show up on the list, and if I'm wrong I will mock myself in editing. Regardless though, we have a lot of books to get to, so let's jump into it. First on the list is A Drop of Corruption. Not only do I have a couple of book recommendations for this, but I actually have also a TV show if you're interested. So A Drop of Corruption, if you know nothing about it, but you're interested in checking it out, or at the very least it sounds really cool to you, many of you then likely know that it has plant property components to it where people have been able to enhance themselves using the plant properties specifically from plants, where these massive beings known as leviathans, where they died and their bodies were decomposing, those areas are very rich in these types of plants that then can be utilized to make people like our main character, who has the ability to have perfect recall, have these enhancements. There are all sorts of different kinds of enhancements, and specifically you see our main characters using their enhancements to try and solve murder cases. The TV show that I wanted to recommend is Scavengers Reign. This is an animated show that is truly horrifying, and I definitely think that the idea of an environment that can be very, very dangerous and deadly is present in this. It's very intense. It's more, I would say, sci fantasy rather than murder mystery fantasy, but I do think that that feeling of anything is possible, that the world can be exceptionally deadly, but then watching how the characters try to take advantage of that, I think there's a lot of overlap in those areas. And I actually do think that The Tainted Cup and A Drop of Corruption have elements to them that actually feel horror leaning. That's part of why I feel like this book is so hard to pin down, because even though it is technically falling under the umbrella of fantasy, it's somewhat science fiction, it's somewhat fantasy, it's somewhat murder mystery, and then at times I think it's somewhat horror. And if you like when something feels as though it's blending all sorts of different stories and different genres, I think that Scavengers Reign might be a show you'd be interested in. As for some book recommendations though, we have 3 for this one. One of them would be The Book of Koli. 100%. This absolutely has a lot of scary plants, to put it bluntly and in a silly fashion. We also have The Queens of Renthia. I really enjoy this trilogy, and I think it is still among one of Sarah Beth Durst's most underhyped. If you are familiar with this author, it's likely because of the cozy fantasy books that she has put out over the last couple of years, and these feel very different in style from Queens of Renthia. So regardless of whether you liked those other ones, it doesn't really matter because this feels and reads so different. Its world building is very, very intense. You're looking at a society that lives among the forest, and they have learned how to live within this forest, but there are these beings within it that are these spirits, and they have an instinct to protect the forest at all costs. And humans, naturally, in living within the forest, do cause some damage to the environment and the wildlife. So these spirits ruthlessly try to eliminate this threat. So you see the humans having to use magic to try to keep the spirits in check. But what happens when the people that are holding them in check start to die? Then who is going to replace them, and what happens in the interim? And I think it's very, very high stakes, and it's very, very intense. And there is a tiny bit of a mystery component throughout the trilogy as well that I think is kind of fun. It's not necessarily quite the same. It's not really a murder mystery, but I do think that the plot keeps you guessing in regards to certain things, and it's very high stakes, and of course has plants. Book of Koli, I would say, is a little bit more sci-fi. Also, if you don't know, I recommend books even if they didn't work for me, and the Book of Koli wasn't perfectly to my taste, but I still think it's a good recommendation for if you like The Tainted Cup and A Drop of Corruption. The other one I wanted to mention would be The Rithmatist. If you are looking for something that is similar in the murder mystery component and still has really cool magic, but you maybe want something a little bit lighter, a little bit more fun, The Rithmatist is going to fit this. This is similar to what I was saying about Sarah Beth Durst. This is one of Sanderson's least picked up books out of his many, many books, and this is in part, I would say, because of the fact that it is for technically a younger demographic, but that does not mean that it can't be enjoyed by older readers. I thought it was so fun. The magic itself was really exciting, and the mystery component I think also keeps you guessing. Next up, we have Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil. Sorry, my dog is, she's here. I don't know if you can see her little face. Ah, there she is. Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V. Schwab. This one has been very, very, very well received. It's been one of my favorite books that I've picked up this year. So none of the recommendations, unfortunately for me personally, I feel like are quite on the same level when it comes to how exquisite the themes are done and how well we are able to represent that through the writing itself, through the characters, through the plots. But I do think a lot of these have similarities and overlap. We have A Dowry of Blood as well as The Bewitching. Both of these have components to them that show what happens when somebody is taking advantage of another person. They're manipulating them. They are doing what they can to isolate them. And there is, in some fashion, a element of romance woven into that, or at the very least, attraction. And sometimes attraction that the characters wish they didn't hold, or sometimes attraction they don't understand, or sometimes even attraction that doesn't perhaps actually come from them and is another form of manipulation, even potentially through magic. They're both twisted, they're both disturbing. I think that Bury Our Bones could easily fit within the horror category, and I think that's true of both of these as well. We also have a newer release called As Many Souls as Stars, and this one to me is almost like if you combined Addie LaRue and Bury Our Bones, as it does have that feeling of if Addie LaRue was a little bit more romantically driven between the antagonist and the main character, which is actually something a lot of people were wanting out of Addie LaRue. Not necessarily what I was going into it for, but that was an expectation a lot of people had. And if that was an expectation that you had, then maybe As Many Souls as Stars will be to your liking. But there's also a component within this that I do think fits to Bury Our Bones as well, in that there is this sense of these characters that can't seem to escape each other, and there is a toxicity to the relationship itself. Next up, we have Brigands and Breadknives. I could have easily just thrown out there any cozy fantasy because I think that that's part of the reason a lot of people like Travis Baldrey's works, but I didn't want to do that because not all cozy fantasy are the same. So I wanted to pick pieces of what makes Travis Baldrey's cozy fantasy the way it is and try to give cozy fantasy recommendations that have those things in common. So one thing is that we do have a romantic subplot, but it is not necessarily the A plot, because cozy fantasy now sometimes feels like it could easily fit into fantasy romance or romantasy, and for some people they want that cozy feeling like what they get in Travis Baldrey's works, and they don't mind a romantic subplot, but that's not really what they were going for, and so I wanted to ensure that we captured that. And then additionally, I think there's something about this one that has a almost getting up every day and trying to achieve your dreams, and maybe the dreams aren't that big, but they are significant to you. And there's an element to almost your day-to-day life and what your job is that I think is true of Travis Baldrey's works, and then also the two that I'm going to recommend. So one of them would be The Phoenix Keeper, and the other one would be You Can't Spell Treason Without T. The Phoenix Keeper is following a character who works at a zoo where all of the creatures there are mythological creatures, many of whom are endangered, and our zookeeper cares very, very passionately about the animals that she cares for, specifically, as you might guess from the title, the phoenixes, and they are looking to try and start a breeding program at the zoo. And so she, being so passionate about this, has to push through her anxiety to try and get donors to give them money to get this other zoo to cooperate with them and select them as the one that they are going to work with for this idea. And she is terrified of this prospect, but she just so badly cares about the animals, and she's doing everything she can, even when it means going outside her comfort zone. But it does mean she is often overworked and underpaid and undervalued, which is something that I think not only many people can relate to, but I think what you see in Travis Baldrey's works as well is how much you have to put in to make those seemingly little dreams become a reality. And then we have You Can't Spell Treason Without T. So if you are curious, the romantic plotline in this one, it actually has a couple that is already established, which is very rare. We usually see people falling in love, but in this scenario, we see a couple that is already together and they're trying to make this new life work for them. And I think that this one is probably one of the closest to Travis Baldrey's because it still has that feeling of kind of the Dungeons and Dragons kind of fantasy. The Phoenix Keeper is a little bit more contemporary fantasy. This one I think is much more feeling like a fantasy, or I always put it as fantasy forward. It feels like a fantasy forward world. And actually the things that are going on in the background in this world are actually really cool when it comes to a fantasy lens. But regardless, you're seeing these two characters set out on their own. They're kind of leaving behind what they're used to, and they're trying to start life together. And they're specifically trying to open up this little tea shop and once again make those little dreams become a reality. And it's very, very darling, and it's very cute, and it's a lot of fun watching how the community comes together to help them in this goal. Next up, we have the Devils. And the Devils, even though I'm a big Joe Abercrombie fan, the Devils didn't necessarily work for me. And ironically, the recommendation I'm going to give also didn't work for me. So I'm hoping that if you liked the Devils, that you will also like this recommendation. And that would be How to Become the Dark Lord and Die Trying. I think both of these are super vulgar and explicit on purpose. I think both of these are using those things for the sake of humor, while also trying to provide commentary on things that are very, very serious. And also I think they're taking some familiar things we've seen before. In the case of the Devils, you're looking at oftentimes these institutions that are very powerful, and you're using that as kind of a backdrop for commentary on how society functions within that, what they give respect to, what they give their worship to, their money to. You're kind of criticizing all those things, or at the very least having commentary on those things through this ragtag group of supposedly the worst of the population. And then How to Become the Dark Lord and Die Trying, you're taking that familiar hero's story and you're showing a character that has realized over and over and over again, because they keep dying, that maybe in order to succeed, you might have to actually take the path of the villain instead. And it's more so, I would say, commentary on what we see as familiar within the fantasy genre itself, as opposed to some more real-world things, although those are present to some degree within this as well. But both of them have that kind of edgy, almost sort of satirical way of telling their stories that I think if you like one, there's a chance you'll like the other. Next up, we have Hemlock and Silver, and I promise I'm not only going to mention other T. Kingfisher books because that feels kind of dumb, but T. Kingfisher has written so many books that I think if you are unfamiliar with a lot of the backlist fantasy she has, it might be helpful to know which of her works are most like Hemlock and Silver, because she's also written horror, she's written fantasy romance, she has so many things out there that I wanted to ensure that if you liked this one, here are a couple others that are more like it than the rest. And so the two I wanted to mention would be A Sorceress Comes to Call, as well as Nettle and Bone. I actually liked A Sorceress Comes to Call and Nettle and Bone more than Hemlock and Silver. I still enjoyed Hemlock and Silver. I just feel like these two are really T. Kingfisher at her absolute best. One of them feels a little bit more like it's a blend with horror, and that would be A Sorceress Comes to Call. Of course, they're funny no matter what. I feel like she can't resist being funny in her works. This one does have humor, but it also has commentary on a child in an abusive situation, specifically the mother, who is a sorceress. And then you also have a character who is an older woman who can tell that something's going on. She just doesn't know all the details. So the horror components come with you having the knowledge of what the sorceress is capable of, but the other main perspective not knowing. So you really don't want her to get on her bad side, but you also want her to take her down and to help the daughter who is in this horrible situation. And in regards to the fantasy pieces, it is a little bit more, I would say, like a grim fairy tale. So you're blending those components together. And then with Nettle and Bone, you follow a character who was never really meant to be somebody. She was never really meant to be the hero of the story, but after her sister was married off to a horrible man, but it was a political marriage that's very important to their kingdom, she wants to be able to save her sister while also not causing problems for all of the population, and she has no idea what to do, but she sets out on this quest regardless, and it definitely feels like a fairy tale, and it's a lot of fun. So I think that both of these have pieces about them that you might like if you liked Hemlock and Silver. Also, because I am technically filming this before the nominees are announced, I don't know if the book Greenteeth is going to be nominated or not. If it is, then I would say if you like that nomination, you might like this one, or if you liked this one, you might like that one. But I do think that this is probably one of the closer books I've come across to T. Kingfisher. If you do like that fairy tale feeling, and you like a little bit of humor, you like the friendship that develops, you like the sort of quest feeling that you get in things like Nettle and Bone, you might like this one as well. Hemlock and Silver, I definitely think has a very, very funny main character, and I think the main character in Greenteeth is a little bit rougher around the edges, but certainly there are components to both that I think fans are going to see overlap. Next up, we have the Raven Scholar. One of the recommendations for this would be the Tainted Cup and its sequel, Drop of Corruption, as I do think both of these utilize the genre blending really, really well, and both of them have a mystery component, and very specifically a murder mystery component, while also having really deep lore and interesting worlds. And then the other recommendation would be Gideon the Ninth. I actually think Gideon the Ninth excels at utilizing the kind of humor that it does, and sometimes trying to have something serious happen and almost having this escape room feel at times, while also being really stupid simultaneously, and I think it blends it perfectly, basically. The Raven Scholar has worked for so many people in that regard, and while I think that perhaps Gideon the Ninth was a tad bit more to my liking, I still think absolutely they felt similar to each other. And if that was a piece of the Raven Scholar that you really liked, you liked the tone, you liked the blending of these sorts of things, then the Gideon the Ninth feels like a very, very good recommendation. That's it though for some recommendations for if you like these Goodreads Choice Award nominees, you might like these as well. Or maybe if you like these, you might then want to check out some of these Goodreads Choice Award nominees. I'll have all the information regardless in the description bar down below. And not only are you welcome to give your own recommendations for these, but if there are any I didn't mention that you have recommendations for, feel free to give those suggestions also. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.